Right, guys, we'll get started then. So, thank you all for joining this webinar on exit insights and why people leave. So, just to give you firstly a bit of background on me. So, who am I? So, I'm a specialist working in the cybersecurity recruitment space. I've been in the space for over 6 years now, and I've worked with many specialists across cyber in territories such as the UK, the DAC, the Benelux region, and the Middle East, both on contract and perm. And I've completed nearly 200 assignments now, specifically in security. I now head up the UK and Ireland team at Adeptis Group, a specialist cybersecurity staffing firm. So I guess the big question is, why am I presenting on exit insights? So at Adeptis Group, we've been in the privileged position whereby we speak to thousands of candidates and hiring teams across the world. We've watched as the security industry has grown and the competition for talent has soared. Having seen teams that have done really well throughout this time and managed to hold on to that talent and grow really successful capabilities, and ones that have really struggled. So this is our opportunity to give back, share some of the insights, share some of the trends that we're seeing, and hopefully spark conversations surrounding creativity when it comes to retaining good people in our business. We hear every day about the skill shortage and the war for talent. So as this continues to become more aggressive, it's going to become more difficult for us to hold on to good people as opportunity considerably climbs. So what are we going to cover today? So today we're going to cover some of the industry data. I think it's important to start with what is the data showing us and what are the challenges that businesses are facing in today's market? What are candidates looking and more importantly leaving for? And what can businesses be doing better to retain staff? And then we'll go through any questions at the end. So firstly, I touched on it in the opening part there, but demand in the space. It's a big challenge when we're seeing the impact of increasing levels of demand on our security teams. And I'm talking about the number of roles that are out there in the market, just the number of options that each individual has to look at, whether they have decided to make a move or just passively exploring the market. The demand for space is undoubtedly growing. Some of the stats you'll see on the screen there is that 73.4%. So that is the growth in the UK cybersecurity skills gap over the last year. And 56,800 unfulfilled cyber roles. That's the number of roles that it's estimated to be unfulfilled at this present moment in time. One of the big things that is also in there is that one in four industry professionals are being regularly approached on a weekly basis now, and our survey data suggests that when a candidate is approached, they are 80% more likely to start looking at multiple opportunities that are on the market. So if they weren't looking before, once they start to entertain conversations with one potential employer or opportunity, that's a snowballing effect, which means that they are much more likely to start to seek other options and other opportunities out there. The next one is 153,000. So that's the number of job postings there were last year just in cybersecurity alone. And what we're seeing is a huge increase in cyber enabler roles as well. So just to give you an idea about how that 153,000 is split. So your core cyber roles, the 34.7% there, that is your typical roles in cyber that we would expect to see. So things like your CISOs, your security architects, incident responders, pen testers, the list goes on. But cyber enabler roles are roles where core cyber skills are now being present within those skill sets. So they might not necessarily be identified as core cyber roles, but have a demand for cyber skills and cyber education. So these are software developers that are potentially working on cyber products. These are project managers that are leading on cyber specific programs of work. And one of the key things that I wanted to highlight here is even the demand for people who we're potentially training into our cyber team for the future, cross-skilling individuals into those roles, are now getting regularly targeted as the cyber market kind of grows and the war for talent increases. Again, when surveyed, this is quite an interesting one. The survey suggests here that workers and skill shortages is joint second of the biggest challenges that we will face as an industry over the next couple of years. So it's right up there with the risk of emerging tech, keeping up with changing regulations, some things that we're very well versed in within the security field. But the skill shortage means that the demand is going to skyrocket, and that is going to prove quite challenging in its own right. More demand simply means more opportunities, and more opportunities means we need to work harder than ever to keep our staff content, fulfilled within the businesses that we occupy. So next we've got medium tenure. So the reason that I wanted to highlight this is because it shows a direct correlation between what we see in the recruitment space of security. So where we see the highest demand of roles being in technical security, so things like detection and response, pen testing, technical security, we also see the lowest tenure within those positions. And the reason for this, to me, is relatively obvious. There's just a significant imbalance of opportunities to candidates there, which means that when a candidate becomes disgruntled or potentially feels like they're not being valued enough or doesn't see the progression within their current role anymore, there is a plethora of opportunities for them to be looking at and considering when it comes to their next move. And again, this is where we see tenures like 1.3 years for forensics and response, 1.4 years for pen testing, and 1.9 years for other areas of technical security. It's not particularly great within the GRC and security management areas either, but at least there's some more stable tenures to suggest there. And one of the most shocking things by far is 1.5 years of CISO tenure. So we're currently compiling a bit of a report to see the impact that a CISO leaving an organization can have. But it probably won't come as a surprise that when we look at the data, when a CISO looks to leave or has departed a business, it has a significant impact on the structure of the team below, the likelihood that they will be open to looking at new roles, just the stability of their function as a whole, and how open they are to entertaining conversations of a progressive move nature. So next, so what are candidates looking and leaving for? So this is an important question in its own right. Why are our people leaving? But ultimately, what are they moving for? So let's look firstly at why people leave. So I've broken this down into two categories. So we have the top three areas here, which you'll see are growth opportunities. The reason I say growth opportunities is all within the eye of the beholder. So 99% of the time when we speak to candidates, one thing that we find out is that it's perceived growth opportunity that they move for. It's perceived that they're going to be getting better training. It's perceived that that role is more important than what they were doing previously. It's perceived that the team is better set up. You don't actually know until you're in there. So it's one of those things where they have that confidence to make that move because of the perception of the opportunity being that much greater. So there we see things like lack of career development opportunities, better title promotion, better remuneration. Obviously, we'll come on to talk about salary in a bit, but that is a big driving factor. Below that, we have things like bad work-life balances, burnout. The rate of burnout insecurity is incredibly high. In a recent Forrester blog revealed that 60% of cybersecurity professionals experienced extreme stress or burnout, and 51% were advised or prescribed medication for their mental health as a result of this. Negative and unhealthy work culture also is a factor here. It encompasses a huge range of different areas, this, but ultimately relates to or directly to employee disengagement. So, whereby an employee has kind of decided that they are no longer willing to participate within that culture, they don't see the relevance, they don't feel valued within the business, and to put it simply, they've just shut off to realistically looking at kind of pursuing further opportunities with that business or being engaged in more than just doing the day to day. And one thing that's not on there, but still a shocking stat that I wanted to share with you is combined with the rate of burnout, the negative culture, I guess just the lack of opportunities internally in some cases, 13% of all people surveyed in that previous survey decided to move away from security altogether. So even when we're encouraging people to come to the sector, we're not setting them up right. If we're not looking after those individuals, we're not giving them the opportunities or the cultures or the support mechanisms surrounding them to really help them thrive in these roles, they're moving back to the original areas that they came from. So let's talk a bit about work-life balance. So the stat on the screen suggests this is all industries globally, so it might seem a bit low, but I think it's an important data point to share because we're very familiar within areas of tech, specifically within IT security, kind of moving things towards evolving technologies like the cloud. Now, remote working in our specific industries is prevalent, more prevalent than ever. So when we look at this 12% of global remote working or hybrid working pre-pandemic and compare it to the 22% at present day, it's clear to see that remote working is here to stay, and that balance has now been struck between people genuinely looking at where is a better work-life balance, is it worth me being in the office all the time when I have options out there to spend more time at home, to be more free, spend more time with my family? This year's CIPD Good Work Index surveyed more than 6,000 UK workers. It was a relatively decent sized sample. I found that 24% were looking for a better work life balance as a result of changing personal circumstances or desires to improve their home work life balance. The desire to work more flexibility, either in the hybrid sense or having more flexibility in the working hours, has increased dramatically in recent years, and businesses who want to gain that competitive edge are capitalizing on this desire. One thing that's worth mentioning here now is that the term remote jobs is now searched over 18,000 times per month. It also means that if we don't look at the people that we're employing in the business and look at how their personal circumstances are changing, how we can accommodate them in terms of their evolving lifestyles or their evolving needs, as they go through not just their careers but their own personal journeys, we're more at risk than ever to losing them to a role that potentially can offer more flexibility. Ultimately, it also means things like jumping on interviews and going on a Zoom call has never been easier than ever. So it's quite difficult to understand where the potential flight risks might be if people are in that remote capacity. So salary trends. So again, we come back to the financials here. Inflated salaries and security is probably not going to shock you. It's probably no surprise. We've seen a number of US firms and firms from other territories, it's worth mentioning, coming over to the UK market, throwing some serious money at the problem to attract top tier talent. And for the most part, it does work, but whether they stick it out long term or not, it's a different story. Ultimately, the reason that I want to highlight this is because we can see year on year some quite dramatic growth within things like governance risk and compliance, and more technical areas of security as well. Um, if we're not keeping a close eye on salary trends, then we're going to effectively fall massively behind the curve. And this is where you can end up with quite significant imbalances within the team. Over the course of the year, salaries will increase quite dramatically, and within the sector, they always have done, they always will do. If we're not at least arming ourselves with the knowledge of what those salaries look like, we can quite quickly fall behind these trends and think that individuals who are leaving our business are leaving for dramatically more money, when in reality, we would have only had to marginally move their salary because the risk of moving is a lot more significant than the risk of staying with a progression plan. So if you're unsure about salary and what you should be paying or what the market is paying, every year we do a comprehensive cybersecurity specific salary guide. And this version is out now. So whether you want to get in touch with me or my managing director, Hubert Colvin, or just info@adeptisgroup.com, we're more than happy to provide you with a copy of this. So, another factor linking to both negative culture and mental health in the workplace is engagement within an organization and individuals feeling valued. So, I've got some really famous quotes up here from the likes of Simon Sinek and some others, Richard Branson included in there, all about value employees and just genuinely people within a business and the importance of mental health value and feeling part of an organization. Recent research shows that if employees feeling valued within a workplace, sorry, recent research shows that employees valued in a workplace is declining. Only 1 in 2 employees feel somewhat valued now, and 1 in 10 don't feel valued at all. And that's according to a January 2023 report done by WorkHuman. In such a high pressure industry that is cybersecurity, it stands to reason that a major factor for employee disengagement is related to the lack of value they feel within these organizations. So we've been tracking this, and at Adeptis Group, we've seen a staggering 70% of motivations to move. The way that they're reported to us, they demonstrate either a diminishing sense of value or a sense of value that was never really instilled in the first place. And over time, that's just led to them just feeling very confused about what they're in the organization to do, what value they actually bring, whether the organization actually values the security team as a whole. Most of these are linked to things like salary promotion reviews being pushed back or just not held at all, additional responsibilities being assigned with a lack of additional recognition. Obviously, this isn't always financial, but sometimes it can be. Ideas and input towards improvement being overlooked or pushed to the side, and an all-time high environment with growing task lists and not enough support from above or laterally. And as we talk about burnout before, just that genuine mental health decline. it's a common trend we see within security when people come to us. One of the things when they're actively looking over the last couple of years, we've noticed a stark increase in individuals who are reporting feeling on the verge or previously going through a bit of a break from work because of burnout, and just having that fear of going back to that same environment. So, finally, the last question that we're going to answer today. So, what can you do to better retain staff? What can you do? And research suggests, as we talked about here, and I've alluded to a little bit, it's not about making massive leaps forward. It's about small 1-2% changes that you can make within your teams that are going to have a massive impact. Aiming for manageable incremental improvements rather than radical change is a must within this area. So I've got a picture of an ostrich on the screen here, and it's avoiding problems. And the reality of me putting this up there is all too often when we're speaking to candidates, it's clear at the point that they're open to conversations, it's had a direct reflection on their feelings towards their existing employer. And one of the reasons that they're looking is because they feel like they're either getting lip service or empty promises. They're not hearing or being heard or feeling validated. Their requests are just simply being denied or just not listened to appropriately. Or they're simply pushing conversations that are quite important to the individual in question further back. So talking about remote working here, flexible hours, salary, the list goes on, important benefits that your employees might want to at least understand what the appetite of the organization is that just aren't being had in a constructive conversation nature. So in all these cases, we're effectively being like the ostrich. And when I say this is quite astounding, I mean, I know it always comes down to time constraints, hierarchy challenges, and I guess proper communication challenges and reviews that are in schedule. But ultimately, it seems to be that there's been a massive increase in individuals not feeling valued within organizations and feeling like key conversations like this are just being postponed and moved further down the line or just not had at all. And over time, it's one of these things where that leads to a breakdown in feeling value. That leads down to a breakdown between the employee and the employer in terms of trust. And they just cannot necessarily see where that career is moving for them in that particular organization. So here we have some quite interesting bubbles on the screen. And this was the reason I wanted to that was this was the effects by organizations to create positive working culture. So when surveyed and they actually inputted some of these things into the organization, this was the percentage of employees that said that their sense of value had completely transformed or significantly gone up. So 49% said that they valued the flexible working arrangements that their employer put in place. Probably no surprise there when we talk about remote working, people's lives changing, they're being agile to those kinds of demands. 42% for flexible hours. Again, just things like being supportive of going in on the school runs, pickups, medical appointments, not always just having to be in the office from a 9 to 5 nature, finishing early, finishing late, starting late. 35% with mental health. We see the rate of burnout at an all-time high within security. So it's probably no surprise that 35% said that they significantly valued their employer making positive steps to improve mental health awareness across the organization, or at least providing support for them in that capacity. And I think last but not least, probably the most staggering of all was the 36% that said they valued just cybersecurity and what they did within the business being promoted to an organization-wide level. So the function that they played, the importance of the role that they played, and that business getting behind them to promote them, be a ambassador and a champion of security. The phrase I commonly hear is security is always seen as a cost rather than an enabler. And I think that 36% shows that quite clearly that when we can transform the business perception of security is just the cost to security is an enabler, then that has a dramatic increase on the motivation, the morale, the value that those employees and those teams feel. And that it might take a lot in some circumstances, but to get the ball moving or to get the dial up a couple of percentage points, it certainly doesn't take an awful lot. So we've covered a few different things there, but all of those changes were linking back to open conversations with teams to better understand what they needed to remain happy or what they needed to get happy and feel supported within their roles. Some of these might not be possible to implement in your organization, but the point of this slide is not to say everybody should be allowed to work from home or let's completely change the working hours. The point is to promote things like flexible and frequent structure of these conversations to understand how individual desires within an organization change, what it is they actually want to feel supported and valued in that role, and how we can keep them feeling valued, progressed, give them that challenge and that opportunity. And that leads me on nicely to the next slide, which is engagers. So if you listen to nothing else throughout this entire presentation, these next two slides are going to be pretty important because these fundamentally are the reasons that employees join and stay with businesses. So you've got the six key features there. So growth, advancement, achievement, recognition, job challenge, and responsibility. So these things drive engagement and value within a business. They keep people engaged with our brand, they keep people engaged in the team, and ultimately they help to lead to some really solid retention stats when we look at people who have these six things versus people who only have three or four, or even in some cases five. So when we're looking at our employees, what we really want to be doing is looking at, how are we offering them the advancement? How are we offering them growth opportunities? Is that clear to them? Is their sense of achievement within the business really clear? Is that sense of recognition there? Have they got enough job challenge? That might change progressively as they become more competent within their roles. Responsibility, if they're not feeling challenged, do they have enough responsibility? Do they feel valued enough within the function that they're performing? And again, when we talk about growth, that's a really important one because that's how do I get to the next stage? How am I feeling fulfilled within the role? How am I moving my career forward? And again, fundamentally, all of these things we need to have in place to keep people engaged. The next one is disengagers. Now, a common misconception between engagers and disengagers is if I do all of these six things right, then people will be happy, people will join the business, people will stay. In such a visible market that today is, especially in a competitive one like cybersecurity, people expect these as a bare minimum. So people come in and expect good management, good policies, good working conditions, a good salary, good status, and good security within their position. When they're not there, though, they can be significant drivers to move. And this is a forever moving dial of engagement across each of these six different areas. So if management suddenly becomes poor, that significantly can drop off, and that can be a disengagement within the business. If the policies become clunky and over complex, and they don't understand the process there, that can be a disengager. If we're talking about something that is very common in the security world, acquisitions of businesses, mass redundancies, things like huge structural changes that can make people question their status, their security, even in some cases their salary if they've been bumped up and they're not feeling like they've been paying enough for the position that they're being fulfilled. So again, how often are we reviewing these things? For me, good practice here is at least every 3 months we should be having a conversation on engagers and disengagers to understand where our people are at and what motivates and drives them. And in each of these 12 areas overall, how they feel with scoring and how we're meeting their individual wants and needs. Culture. So again, coming back to that negative culture and that versus that positive culture, it's a huge reason. It's a huge reason why employees are leaving. And our data suggests that one in every three leavers, every, every time that somebody speaks to our agents here at Adeptis Group, one of the biggest factors that we're able to draw out is that culture is a defining factor that they're looking for. Either they're seeking a better culture or they're looking to move away from a negative one. The Glass study review found that culture significantly matters not only to employees that are considering staying in a job. So 77% said that they would consider company culture to stay, but also ones that are looking to kind of move. So if we're not providing individuals with a good company culture, if we're not letting them drive the culture that we're setting up, if we're not making them feeling included within what that culture stands for, it's quite difficult to keep them engaged. Now, the reason for me bringing this up is culture as a whole is an interesting one, and a lot of organizations, especially large businesses, have culture preset. So one of the common challenges that we see, and we've collected insights from a number of CISOs and key implementing people within security who do this really well, is this idea of creating a micro culture within security teams. So what do I mean by this? So say you're a security person and you join a law firm. That firm obviously delivers legal services. You deliver security. Your role is to keep the security sound for the law firm and its customers, and protect its assets. But your values might not necessarily directly align to that, and the culture of the law firm itself, it might not necessarily be the business that you see it being culturally, or the business you want to be part of culturally. So, how do good CISOs and good head of securities define that culture to make it more about the security team, their objectives, how they add value, what they stand for, what they live and die by, and what their expectations are in that culture, and make it security centric as opposed to just that default set by the organization. And again, we touched on it a few times, but engagement is also a challenging factor. So one of the most important strategies for employee retention is to build up a number of different strategies within that engagement side. So how can we keep employees engaged? How can we spot disengaged employees? How can we stop that disengagement from spreading across teams? And I think that spotting a loss of engagement is a key factor on whether someone's bought into the team. How are they performing within their role? How are they actually engaging in things like progressive decision making opportunities, looking at kind of how they're performing within their role within the team. It's not just simply are they turning up to work, are they doing their job? It's how are they actually involving themselves in the wider conversation where we've got set objectives, set missions, inputting into that culture and really driving for success. So again, for us, it's one of those things where it's there was an exercise that one of the CISOs that I talk to quite regularly that's been very successful in retention. And what they did, and what they still do to this day, is whenever somebody joins or somebody leaves their business, regardless of which side of the spectrum they're on, they specifically ask them throughout those onboarding or offboarding stages, what were the best and the worst managers they've had, and what were the best and worst teams that they've worked on. So again, it comes back to this idea of, okay, what does really get this individual fired up in terms of engagement? What does that management style look like, and how can I replicate that? What does that team culture look like, and does that fit with what we can offer? If we're not going to be getting a person engaged from the off, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to enhance them and enhance their career and give them exactly what they want, both culturally and progressionally throughout their tenure. So again, we're talking a lot about this sense of continuous improvement, and there's a model here that I want to share with you. Full disclosure, I think the Kaizen model is something that is very well known, and it's known as a continuous improvement method. And the whole point of the webinar today that I've discussed isn't about making radical changes to your retention strategies. It isn't about making radical changes to the setup of your team. It's about having those conversations which encourage us for each individual or for the whole team to make those 1 or 2% incremental changes to strive for continuous improvement on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, as opposed to just changing everything overnight. So the Kaizen system itself is really about this idea of getting people involved in that discussion. So when we talk about engagement, we talk about feeling valued, when we talk about actually what people want to get from a role, the easiest way to ascertain that is to get them involved in the conversation. Some of the best leaders in the world adopt this system to really get ideas going, take some pressure off of themselves naturally, but create a sense of accountability and a shared purpose and a shared mission when it comes to redefining either an organization's security, the culture, or just genuinely how we're doing the things that we're doing at work. So the processes is what I'm trying to say there. So again, if you look at the cycle there, there's a number of different stages to it, but the principles are quite fundamentally simple. It's about gathering a set of problems, encouraging people to come up with solutions, testing those solutions, looking at what works, what doesn't. If it works, great, let's implement it. If it doesn't, let's try to do something else, and repeating that cycle through on a daily basis and getting everybody involved in those conversations to make sure that we're moving things forward together as opposed to just telling people how to move things forward together, and again, creating that sense of value and inclusion and engagement. So again, full disclosure, stole this story from Steve Bartlett and his 33 Laws of Business and Life. And if you haven't listened to that book or read it, it's a really, really good book. I was listening to it in the car when I was putting this presentation together, and I thought this idea of Toyota's manager of domestic relations, Ron Hay, and the idea of being an idea coach was really resonated with me when it came to retention. So when we talk about engagement, we talk about value, which a lot of these things, let's not forget, are related to individuals feeling valued. Is the value I'm getting here greater than the value I would get elsewhere? And if the answer to that is no, then I will stay. If the answer to that is yes, actually, I feel like I will get more value elsewhere and I will leave. So again, going back to the Toyota story, supervisors were asked how they could review hundreds of thousands of ideas on a monthly or yearly basis, I think it was, and accept 99% of suggestions that arrived in Toyota's suggestion system. So the idea of this is that for anybody in Toyota's system to become a manager, they have to showcase that they are capable of working with others, encouraging idea development, but then ultimately utilizing the experience that they've got to refine those ideas, pick out what can work, what can't work, and work with an individual who came up with the idea to look at ways that they can implement it. So again, this feeling of inclusion, this feeling of value significantly goes up because we feel like we're part of the business. We're not just there to do a day-to-day job. And that's exactly what Toyota looks to do as part of their solution. When we link it to Kaizen, it's all about the Kaizen system. It's all about that sense of continuous improvement, striving for the marginal gains on a daily basis and working with the team to keep them included and valued, and get to that end goal. So how did this work for Toyota? So again, give you a little bit of a brief story, but if you want to really understand it, it's best to go check out Steve Bartlett's book because he does a lot more justice than I will. But in the 1980s, General Motors Fremont plant in California, in terms of quality and productivity and employee engagement, it was one of GM's lowest performing plants by far. The plant itself had a backlog of over 5,000 union grievances, and there were a continuous number of strikes, driving down productivity, to the point where in February of that year, GM closed the factory for good and laid off the entire workforce. Toyota, who wanted to gain access to the US market and wanted to create an opening to build a factory there, spotted this as an opportunity. And they approached GM with a partnership opportunity. The Fremont factory would reopen and be named the United Manufacturing Corporation, so that's NUMMI for short, making one of each of the brand's cars. Toyota even offered to oversee the running of this plant, invest cash, and implement the Kaizen system. They even agreed to rehire all the same workers and use the same workers' unions and the same facilities, the same equipment, everything, despite the failure just 1 year earlier. So that's exactly what Toyota did. They hired like 90% of the previous workforce and sent key leaders to go and be trained in this philosophy of Kaizen, that management structure whereby we're not just telling people what to do, we're encouraging them to come up with ideas and then working with them as an idea coach to implement that in terms of what's good, how it can work, refining those ideas on either a team level or an individual level to give people that value. Management was simplified. So they took this from 14 lines down to 3 lines, and ensured that everybody within that business was trained on Kaizen philosophy and this sense of continuous improvement. Pretty much everything else stayed the same. And as if by magic, employees that had previously been disillusioned, that they turned against their employers, the business began participating in key decisions. You know, employees that previously turned against their employers wanted to leave, looked at ways to move away, not turning up for work, union grievances, you name it, a lot. They now started participating in key improvement decisions and making suggestions towards how that plant could improve its productivity, its tools, its processes, everything. And rather than just being asked to do their bit, the interesting thing about the continuous improvement system and Kaizen as a whole is that team members, sorry, were tasked to spot opportunities for continuous improvement. And anything that was tested and worked was implemented as standard working practice. And anything that didn't was utilized then to go back to the drawing board, look at how it failed, see if there was a way to rework it. And up until that individual said, look, I don't think this is actually going to work. I think I need to come up with a better idea. They didn't give up on it. The results speak for themselves. So within a year, this new factory had the highest quality and productivities, and employee satisfaction rates were through the roof. It had the best productivity and employment engagement rates that GM had of any plant in the world, and it went from 12 defects per vehicle just down to one. And even though cars were being produced in 50% of the time, management recorded the implementation of nearly 10,000 new ideas. By 1988, the plant was winning awards, and by 1990, this became the global standard for car manufacturing. So it was all achieved in a number of years. But keep in mind that wasn't the tools, it wasn't the technologies that they were utilizing that kept them in the business. It wasn't the newest, coolest kit. It was all to do with people feeling valued, people encouraged to share their ideas in the sense of a unified mission, a unified goal, and keeping that progression moving forward. So every day we could see improvements happening to the process. Every day people felt that they were coming to work, they were having a meaningful impact, and that they felt valued. So the question that I want to leave you with is what changes can you implement today? Whether it's Kaizen, whether it's small kind of conversations that you want to have, all of the points that we've covered link back towards having these difficult conversations, seeking out, what do our employees want? What can we offer them? What is going to keep them engaged? What are the disengagers? How often are we having those conversations with them? And for me, it links back to yes, you can look at salary, you can look at benefits within the business, but it's more so linking into value and the value that we can provide our employees and our colleagues in terms of the role that they fulfill and just how engaged they are. So if you're looking for quick wins, which I know a few of you messaged me about before, saying, look, really good to get your thoughts, but what can I do today that's really going to have some impact? Here are my 6 quick wins. So I'll just blast these through quickly, but again, keep in mind that in order for these to be effective, you need to have that conversation at an individual level to really understand what that individual's there for, how they feel engaged, how they feel disengaged, and what you can do. Investment in training, it's no surprise. I think InfoSec magazine did an article on this not too long ago, but 1 in 5 companies admitted that they hadn't invested, or sorry, no, only 1 in 5 companies said that they'd invested in their security this year so far, which is staggering because if we're not investing in security as a whole, we're just not investing in our people, training, and kind of giving them those opportunities. So first and foremost, is there a strategy there? Is there a plan? It doesn't have to be expensive training and kind of SANS courses. It can be fundamentally training that's going to help them get better within their role on a day-to-day basis. Salary review meetings. So we spoke about that quite a lot today, but the reality of it for me is how often are we talking about the numbers that people are earning? Those numbers will change. It's driven by the industry, a lot of competition coming into this space from overseas, a lot of new opportunities, not about changing the numbers within your business overnight, but at the very least is keeping an awareness about what is the market rate to be able to have that conversation. Regular benchmarking exercises, what are our competitors doing? What are we offering? What are they not offering? What is the market asking for? How can we encourage that? How can we give people that within our workplace? Speaking with employees, so feedback, that's one of the biggest things that we talked about today. How often are we scheduling those one-to-one conversations with our people to really understand the engagers, the disengagers, and what drives them, and what we could do, even 1 or 2% changes that would dramatically increase engagement. Exit interviews, for me, I put this on there because it's one of the most underutilized things in this world from a retention point of view. You will lose people. It's just the nature of the game. And unfortunately, if you're not utilizing that conversation to really understand what can we do better, you're missing a trick. The reality of it is at the point that that individual is leaving your business parting, they have nothing to hide from you. They can be as brutally honest as they want to be. And the reality of it is that you can take that advice, you can take what they say, you can challenge it, but they will tell you exactly what they think. And I genuinely think that there's something useful and unbelievably valuable in the brutal honesty of that truth sometimes. And again, defining that common mission, we talk about culture, we talk about engagement, but ultimately we're coming to work and we're finding that we're here for a purpose. It helps a lot more with engagement. If you look at some of the biggest tech companies that have started up from garages, so Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, the one thing that they all had in common was they all had this shared common mission, this shared common goal that regardless of things like in working conditions, salary, whatever it was, we were striving for a mission. And above all else, that is probably one of the most important things we can give our individuals to keep them engaged, valued, and retained within our businesses. Is there any questions that anybody has? Okay, so we've got one here. How often would you schedule review meetings with employees? So I kind of touched on it a little bit. It depends on how you want to do it. I think in terms of a structured conversation, at least once every 3 months. A lot can change within 3 months, so you might want to do some informal check-ins every now and again. But when we talk about those 12 factors, the six engages, the six disengages, you at least want to be implementing some sort of framework surrounding, okay, how can I check for these 12 things to understand how engaged or disengaged this employee is? Because those are going to be the big signs. And if you're getting answers on those in a scoring system, it will help you delve a little bit deeper in terms of how that employee really feels about those 12 key factors. Okay, perfect. Well, look, guys, thank you very much for joining today. I hope that's been valuable. Last thing I'd like to add is that you will all be getting the insights one pager out from this. So we've got the white paper, sorry, that'll be coming out to you as part of participating within this. You'll also get the opportunity to book a free 15-minute strategy call with me. So if there's any further questions that you have that you just don't want to share on here, or you're thinking, I've got a bit of a complex problem with my business. Love to get your take on how I can actually start to implement some of this, or I have no idea where to start. Then please feel free to book in with that call. I'm always happy to talk, as you'll probably tell from this. So happy to sit with you and go through that completely free of charge. And yeah, we're going to be hosting a number of these webinars, and they'll take different formats over the next few months and weeks. But hopefully, you can join us for the next one. But till then, take care.